Hello! So I had to rewatch this scene. It's not that I particularly like this movie, but I realized that this scene is sort of engraved in my brain and has been an unconscious motivator for this project where I want to make an easy, basic, yet luxurious set of underwear consisting of different varieties of briefs and bras that are interchangeable and allow for a lifelong cycle. I guess it's just how orderly and pretty this lingerie drawer looks. Nothing is overflowing, for example. This is related to the topic because later she meets her neighbor in the elevator and she asks her, "Hey, can you tell that I'm wearing underwear? Because I totally am." And the girl replies, "Well, I think that's kind of the point." Which reminded me that I totally need some kind of briefs, in addition to the ruffled briefs I made last week, that don't disrupt the general silhouette. It's about panty lines. So I'm personally not a big fan of thongs. I think they look rather awkward. I prefer what we call Brazilian cut briefs. Those are usually made with some stretchy lace or fabric in the back here, so that they give a seamless look. It was a bit challenging to create a pattern for this with a material that doesn't stretch really, because I'm working with silk. But it turned out pretty well. They are cut on bias here and don't have a seam, so there won't be any lines. Don't be afraid to make this pattern for your own measurements, especially since I made a PDF with detailed instructions for you, for free. And seriously, it's just like painting by numbers. It took me roughly 13 minutes to draft, and obviously you'd have to make a mock-up to see if everything is to your liking, but you'd have to do that with the ready-made pattern anyway, only this one will be made for your actual measurements. One thing you'll need for the pattern is the elasticity coefficient. I described it in the document, but I'll show you here as well. Well, it sounds complicated, it's just the number that defines how stretchy your fabric is, in this case on bias. For that I fold it over on the diagonal, mark 10 centimeters and stretch it out. This one stretches out to 13 centimeters. Now I divide 10 centimeters by 13 centimeters, and that is my elasticity coefficient. Before we proceed with the sewing though, since this is about panty lines, the history of how we reveal and hide our underwear is such an interesting topic on its own. Wait, let me show you. For a long time, the layer closest to the skin were these linen shifts. And over those shifts one would wear stays or corsets which would act as shapewear. People obviously didn't have washing machines, and some of these intricate clothes were not even meant to be washed at all. So these shifts or chemises would act as a sort of barrier to protect the skin, but also to protect the costly clothes worn over it. Now if you're a person of status, showing how clean and wide and intricate this layer is becomes a signifier of high privilege. It shows a certain habitus, a lifestyle that would demonstrate that you have many servants that would take care of your textiles, that you can afford wearing costly everyday garments, and that you yourself take great care in your cleanliness. So these underthings would be adorned with delicate, very costly, handmade lace, and this lace is essentially what's peeking from underneath the clothes, usually around the wrists, at the décolleté or the neckline. This type of lacy sleeves definitely demonstrates that you don't have to work with your hands. Now, showing the real underwear would be obviously considered scandalous and vulgar. However, there is a play of illusions in what those implicate. Those ruffs, although obviously not part of the undergarment itself, are supposed to look like they are. Moreover, they show a shift in societal values. It almost looks like a head on a plate, while the body, usually in black, disintegrates into the background. I personally read into these fashions scholarship, abstinence and strictness, an emphasis on the mind which suits Protestant Christian values and the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. Anyway, I don't say that anything that's white or lacy is a direct nod to undergarments. But in my opinion, anything that is alien to the garment worn and sort of peeks from underneath, like a white crisp collar even on a suit, is a reminiscence of the values that stand behind it. Okay, I'm going to transfer my finished pattern now. I connect the gusset and the front piece together, mark the grain line and add 1 cm seam allowance on all the sides where it's not cut on fold. The gusset lining needs a separate pattern piece. The seam allowance here depends on the width of your elastic, and there are many different kinds with different edges which are intricate or simple. You can find many different options on the internet. So how do we go from there to here? This is obviously what we would call shapewear, something that forms the body to achieve a certain silhouette. Now if we look at Spanx or even t-shirt bras, for example, those are obviously meant to blend with the body, while stays or corsets make it pretty clear that the body underneath looks different. In fact, one of the functions of a corset or stays, I'd say, is to clearly demonstrate that you're wearing one, that they are there to achieve a certain fashionable silhouette. Same goes for the lower part of the body. Throughout fashion history, roughly up until the 19th century, a fashionable woman would create a silhouette that leaves you guessing if she even has legs, with the help of layers of many petticoats or crinolines and such. A very distinct exception, however, are the fashions briefly after the French Revolution. Fashionable women preferred plain chemise dresses, almost wearing undergarments as outerwear, which also obviously represents a great shift in values. A sort of poetical image of a woman inspired by antiquity and philosophical writings, flexing her natural body. And maybe she's born with it, maybe it stays, but by looking at portraits and illustrations, it sure seems that they wanted to give the impression of not wearing stays, as if that was their natural shape. And this particular shape, I think, also demonstrates a celebration of youthfulness, which only makes sense after a rather long period of wearing, grey powdered wigs. Fashion then takes its course, as it does, but this was also a very brief period where one could sort of make out the shape of legs, of hips underneath, which was very radical and new. In these fashions, I see a parallel to our contemporary understanding of a naked, natural body. This type of body is supposed to demonstrate a certain age, a certain lifestyle, and in that regard, since it is a natural, beautiful body, it is not meant to be formed by any garments. Shapewear becomes something one should almost feel ashamed of, so it's as seamless and invisible as possible. These briefs are not shapewear, but they do create the illusion of a naked body underneath the clothes. And the fact that we are even able to make out the shapes of the lower body is a rather recent phenomenon. Okay, now I'm folding my fabric on bias. You know what? It is actually considered very bad practice to cut your bias pieces on fold. You're actually supposed to mirror them and cut like so. And if you want to do that, good for you, but I'm too lazy and it works just fine. Just make sure to pull your fabric slightly before cutting so you won't cut into an already stretched textile. I'm cutting out the back pieces twice, then the front piece, and I mark the middle of all the parts with a short snap. So while we're cutting on bias and chatting about the naked body being the actual fashion, it was John Galliano who became famous in the 90s for popularizing bias cut dresses again. He himself was inspired by 30s fashion, especially the creations of Madeleine Vionnet. And the way these dresses are cut, they beautifully fall and drape the body, making it seem almost naked, especially in movement. In a way, this nonchalance of just throwing on a slip dress became synonymous with the 90s, early 2000s it girl. The absence of a bra, furthermore, demonstrates a sexual liberation. So underwear in that regard becomes almost obsolete, something that is not supposed to be seen to not obstruct the view of the figure underneath the clothes. And since fashion is going in circles, this is just another example of how the garment itself became secondary to the body upon which it is portrayed. I think the shift is very beautifully put in this piece by Martin Margiela from his 1997 collection. The body itself is the dress and the body is the mannequin. For the gusset lining, I'm using linen again. Since I don't have matching jersey on hand, I'm using the weave edge to my advantage, so I won't have to serge this edge off. However, if you choose to work with cotton jersey, it will make your process a bit easier. Now I'm connecting the gusset lining and the front piece with a few stitches, so it won't flap around all over the place. So today the new fashionable way to demonstrate one's habitus is the ability to mold one's body, seemingly without the aid of any garments. Make it seem eternally youthful, slim or wide in whatever area. And on the outside it appears to be the result of a certain lifestyle which is not available for mere mortals. A lifestyle with exceeding time to care for oneself, like that girl who is young and beautiful, always on her way to the gym. In some cases, this body is achieved with plastic surgery, which also shows, a certain privilege. And this body is best shown in underwear. T-shirts were considered underwear once, worn underneath shirts, never intended to be the outer layer. Or, leggings. Those are obviously easy to wear, but they also have the best ability to show off the body. So, underwear becomes outerwear. I guess in a way we are obsessed with naked bodies, but that's obviously not the full picture at all. It has more to do with how we blur the lines between the private body and the public representative body. It has to do with privacy versus decorum, but that's a topic for another video maybe. And now onto the elastic for the leg cutout. I measure it on myself like so while pulling it a bit. Now I divide it into 2 pieces. I don't know why, but I just remembered this article where Emma Watson talks about her preparation for the role in this Sofia Coppola movie, and she basically insinuates how a bra strap showing is kind of a vulgar thing, which reminded me of the ambiguity of the 2010s. On one hand, a woman is supposed to wear underwear to either hide or form her body, while any hint of it showing, if not scandalous as before, is considered bad taste. On the other hand, many women, beloved public figures even, start wearing their underwear in a very overtly provocative way, testing the barriers, so to speak. And although labeled vulgar, colorful or bedazzled straps became very popular, like an adornment for the body, part of the look. But let's start with the sewing. I am placing the elastics on the right sides facing upwards and securing it with a zigzag stitch. I recommend to practice on some scraps to figure out how wide and long your zigzag has to be. Keep in mind though that the stitch needs to be very close to this picot edge. Now I'm turning it over and sew it again with a zigzag stitch, covering the raw edges of the gusset lining. While stitching, I push the fabric to the left and stretch out the elastic. The raw edges are now neatly hidden under the elastic, and this picot edge almost acts as lace peeking from underneath. Which brings me back to how we actually do reveal our undergarments today. Well, just 10 years ago it was easy to simply dismiss it as bad taste or even something obscene. They are very clearly on display now, just in a different context with a different connotation. The deliberate choice to show your underwear can be read as a demonstration of sexual liberation, among other things. And since fashion is not just simply trickling down from the upper classes anymore, it is vulgar in the best sense of the word, meaning there is a blur of social classes. So as you can see, there are so many different layers worthy of discussion combined in that topic. The front piece is finished for now. Now I'm going to connect the back pieces together. Since they are doubled, I'm not worrying about rough edges and connect them simply on the wrong sides like so. I pressed the finished seam and secured the seam allowance with a stitch close to that edge. And now I'm going to sew the gusset into the back part, kind of sandwiching it in between here and turning it inside out. I am sewing this together at the seam allowance and now cutting it back at slightly different length to avoid bulk. I am doing the same with connecting the side seams, hugging the front piece with the back in a way, sewing it together. And securing with additional stitch near the seam. Now that I pressed the seams, I will finish with the last elastic. I am measuring the elastic on myself at hip level, pulling it very tight but so it is still comfortable to get out of. I am now marking the elastic into 4 equal parts and sewing it on as before, on the right side with the edge pointing down. While sewing, I am pulling the elastic so it meets the markings at front center, the side seam, the center back, and finally sewing it close, overlapping slightly at the end. Now I am turning the elastic over and securing it again with a zigzag stitch while pulling, as before. At first I was a bit sad because I rushed it and messed up at some points, but then I inspected some underwear that I have that is supposedly from the luxury segment, and I decided that I did a pretty good job. Now that you know how it works, have a close look at the underwear you have. But this is what it looks like finished, and I guess my conclusion is that our clothes, however small or invisible, are carrying a narrative, that we should keep an open mind to fashion, try to objectively examine it and the societal shifts and values it is mirroring. I'm currently working on a high-waisted version of these, and I'm also going to make some bras for the set very soon. Bye!